that, autism and mental health conditions, there's that kind of crossover. So we know that a lot of our children, young people and adults, there tends to be that higher correlation for mental health conditions. And we talked about last week anxiety disorders. This week we're going to talk about depression, and with depression that link is still there, and we know that a lot of our individuals with autism will possibly go on to develop depression. Okay, so it's important that we use a lot of early intervention strategies around that to try and support that from not actually happening. Okay, so we know that it happens in the general population. We know that it occurs quite frequently in the general population, but within our autistic communities it tends to happen at a higher incidence rate. Particularly, some new research has just come out where they're looking particularly at individuals that don't have a learning disability, so have that IQ, that average IQ or higher than average IQ. Depression, it tends to happen more frequently in those individuals without that diagnosed learning disability. Okay, so what I'm going to start talking about first is some of the general symptoms of depression that we see in the general population. This includes things like low mood, so people not wanting to engage in activities that maybe they used to want to engage in, not really feeling like they want to engage with friends or engage with people or do things that once made them happy. They may have these feelings of hopelessness, so feeling like they're a failure, feeling like they can't do anything right, really not wanting to try through fear of failure. There might be some fear of kind of just trying in general, because they're worried that they're not going to do very well, and putting quite high expectations on themselves as well. Might be that you see some physical symptoms around depression as well, so feeling very lethargic, sleeping all the time, sleeping during the day when usually you'd be up and about doing activities that you enjoy, waking in the night, finding it really difficult to go to sleep at night, maybe having night terrors or nightmares, waking up with cold sweats, things like that. Some element of eating, so some issues around eating, maybe the person's gone off their food or they find it quite difficult to actually sit down and eat a meal or eat a snack like they used to, and that kind of social withdrawal as well from all aspects of life, from people and from the world around them. So it's it can be a horrible feeling, and it's where you're really feeling kind of away really from the world and the context of the world. Okay, so there's some of the general symptoms, and there's lots of others, because what we need to remember is all of these conditions affect people in a very personalised way. So it might be that for one person, depression means that they stop eating and that they actually can't enjoy food anymore. For another individual, it might be that they overeat, and they're eating to actual excess to make them feel better. Now, the difficulty we have in autism, as I've just mentioned, a lot of them general symptoms, if you like, we see them within an autism spectrum diagnosis as well. So we know that a lot of our people will socially isolate themselves because they may struggle with social skills, or they may struggle knowing how to communicate. We know that a lot of our individuals with autism have sleep disturbances, or they have problems getting to sleep at night. We know that we have a lot of individuals that have problems around food, so they might eat only certain coloured food or certain brands of food. So you can start to see that the overlap, it can be really difficult to diagnose somebody with depression that has an autism spectrum condition, because what we see in autism is sometimes what you also see in depression, and vice versa. So I suppose the thing we've got to pick apart is the reason, the function of that behaviour. So, for example, for our individuals with autism, it may be that they don't want to communicate with the world around them because they really struggle with their social skills, so therefore they withdraw themselves and they become quite socially isolated. Now, the reason for that behaviour in particular is because they struggle socially, and that's because of the autism diagnosis. For individuals with depression, it can be that they're kind of withdrawing themselves from the world and they don't really want to engage with people. It's not that they don't know how to, they actually are withdrawing, and that's more a symptom of depression. So you can see how it's really difficult how the two overlap, and I think it's about, which all our families do know their people really well, it's about having them communications with people around them that know the person best, and in some elements it's about looking for subtle changes in behaviour. So if you have an individual, a son or a daughter, for example, who is always up on a Saturday morning and goes to football practice and they love it, and then all of a sudden over a period of weeks they withdraw from that and they stop going, and you try and unpick that behaviour. It could be lots of things, could absolutely be lots of things, and we don't always go to depression first of all, but it could be that they're experiencing some kind of depressive symptoms. Okay, so it's about looking at that behaviour and seeing if there's any particular changes within the individual. That's really, really important. So some things to consider when we're looking at depression. One of the big things that I always want you to keep in mind is in the teenage years we have, and it's earlier for some of our individuals, we have hormones, we have body changes, we have all that stuff happening at puberty. That can change behaviour as well. So remember, we can see a peak in behaviour and we can see a difference in behaviour. So it could be a typical development in that respect. It doesn't necessarily always point to a mental health condition. It could just be that the body's changing and the person's responding to that kind of life stage in their development. So, you know, we always need to consider that. Some things to think about then, it's about being really proactive, which sometimes is difficult in the world that we live in, but it's about actually getting our young people and our children early to learn coping strategies. So actually teaching them how can they feel better, how can they ask for help, how can they identify their emotions, and constantly monitoring that. And you know, if you've got a child in school or college, having a conversation with the practitioners around your person to say, can you do a little bit of work around emotional literacy and well-being, because that is, you know, that's the fundamentals really of life, isn't it? Knowing from an emotional well-being point of view that you're okay. So it's about teaching them coping strategies and teaching them social skills, because sometimes, remember, that social skill issue can be linked to anxiety and depression, because if you're really struggling to work out how to act in a situation, you're going to get quite anxious about it. You might get anxious, which then could lead to kind of depressive symptoms, because then you find it difficult to make a friend and then you're feeling lonely. So you can see how one thing kind of has an impact on the next. It can be quite difficult to kind of pick them apart. We always want to focus on strengths, and I know we say this in these videos time and time again, but actually find out what your person's good at and building on it and getting people involved with that person to do the same. So if they're in school, college or higher education, actually looking at that from a strengths perspective, that's really important. There's some programs out there that you can kind of look at for emotional regulation and well-being. There's one called the Incredible 5-Point Scale. There's another one called the Zones of Regulation. You can go onto Pinterest, which I think has some brilliant resources, and you can download some worksheets around my feelings and my triggers and what makes me feel rubbish and what makes me feel good, and have a little look and see if you think any of them would be useful for your person. There's also a really good resource out by Mind, which is actually a workbook that you can work through with your person just to kind of start understanding them emotions, because if we can get in early with this stuff, then our people are possibly less likely to experience additional mental health concerns later on in life. Okay, so lots of things to think about there. The other thing which one of my families use, and again might not be relevant for your person, but it's about being a thought detective. So if your son or daughter is saying, everybody hates me, I'm a really rubbish person, nobody likes me, everyone in school doesn't like me, and you can imagine it goes on, because we know that a lot of our people really have poor self-esteem and self-confidence. In that instance, it's about challenging that and saying, actually, let's make a list of all the people that we know really like you, and why do they like you. And in that instance, for this parent, it worked really, really well. Again, it may not work for everyone, but it's about really challenging some of them thoughts that our children, young people and adults have. Okay, and remember as well that thing that we talk about around masking. You know, where people with autism are constantly trying to fit in to some degree, and they've got to put on that really that mask almost. You know, they've got to behave in a certain way in situations in life, and that can be absolutely exhausting in itself. And you know, that can lead to depression and anxiety also. With masking, we're going to have the Autistic advocate, who is absolutely fantastic, coming on doing a series in a few weeks about masking. I'm really excited about it, so please tune in for that. So, does anyone have any questions? Is anyone having any questions? I've got a few people tuned in. I've got Emma. Hi, Emma. Hope you're okay. Hi, Leanne. How are you? Brilliant. I mean, some of the things that obviously later down the line, after you've tried your proactive and you've tried some of the general strategies, some things that you may be considering is more psychological intervention. So some people will use cognitive behavioural therapy and other psychological interventions, but we need to make sure that they're adapted for individuals with autism, because the likes of CBT can be quite difficult for people with autism if it's not differentiated. Also, we know that within depression there is the use of medication as well, but it's important that we explore all the options before we kind of look at that. So but what I will say is it's very personalised to the individual, so everyone will have their own unique story with that.